Donald Trump has a long history of publicly lashing out at the Fox propaganda network when their own polls show him losing to a Democrat. And you know the Fox propaganda network is currently uncomfortable about the state of the 2024 election because they're now doing everything in their power to bury one of their own polls, which currently shows the vice president beating Trump by 2 points. And we have to talk about it. But before we do, if you end up liking this video and you want to support the channel, please be sure to hit the like, subscribe, and alert bells before you go. All right, friends, we have a clip I want to show you here, this is just so funny to me. Fox thinks it's being sneaky. They really do. They think they're being sneaky, but those of us who are paying attention, we caught it. So Brett Baier, who is supposedly one of the hard news journalists, one of the non-opinion guys, he's not like Sean Hannity or Laura Ingraham or Jesse Waters. He's just straight down the middle, straight news. The reason that you know that he's still overall in the bag for Donald Trump and he recognizes that his network is because he hosts this straight news political commentary program called Special Report, and he buried one of Fox's own top rated polls, which is unflattering for Trump. We're going to play this clip, which really shows it off, and then we'll unpack it together.
I got a call from a couple of people. Could you please be careful in this show? We don't need scandals. We're leading in the polls.
The vice president has said from the beginning that she is running as an underdog. Even when we see these polls closing, these tight polls, it's still within the margin of error.
Everyone who will vote in it has lived through both administrations. They can look around and see their lives are worse now than they were just 4 years ago.
Well, that is the state of the race. We have some more Fox polls coming out, and I know people get inundated with polls and glassed over, but there's some great questions in here as the economy remains the top overall issue for voters. The national poll finds what's the major problem for your family. Grocery prices overwhelmingly is still number one, and you see housing costs, you see gas prices. Meantime, as you look at 3 national head-to-head polls, Fox, New York Times, Siena, the RCP average, you can see just how close this race really is. And then the newest battleground poll, the Marist poll out, take a look at this. I mean, it's basically right there on a razor's edge, especially.
So, you know what's funny? It's just so funny about that. Number one, note the montage. They bring in the montage. It's unflattering for the vice president. It's unabashedly pro-Trump. About how the vice president is the underdog. You have a Trump surrogate saying that everyone thinks that the Harris administration is worse than the Trump administration, that they were better off in the last year of Trump's administration than Harris. You have Brett Baier saying, well, that's the state of the race. Then he talks about new Fox polls. That's good because it's the Fox propaganda network, and Fox, for all its faults, is a top-rated pollster. But then he glosses over that. He says, I know people tend to, gloss and glaze over these things, but they have some pretty good questions. Like, basically, why does Kamala Harris and Joe Biden suck? And why is Donald Trump so good? What are your current issues with this administration? And then he puts some polls together with Fox at the top and completely refuses to acknowledge that in the Fox News poll, in their own damn poll, the vice president is beating Trump by 2 percentage points, 50 to 48. Instead, he's appealing to multiple polls and saying it's within the razor's edge. And it is a close election. But if the situation was reversed and it was Donald Trump leading Vice President Harris by 2 percentage points, don't you think Brett Baier would draw attention to it? Don't you think Brett Baier would be bending over backwards to try to highlight that? Interesting that he won't do it here, but we have the receipts. Fox News poll, Harris tops Trump by 2 percentage points. Vice President Harris edges former President Trump in a head-to-head matchup as more voters see Harris as the candidate who will help the middle class and Hispanics and independents swing in her direction. The Fox News national survey finds a 3 percentage point shift among registered voters in the 2024 presidential contest since mid-August. Trump had a 1-point advantage last month, while Harris is ahead 2 points today, 50 to 48. For reference, in July, Trump was ahead by 1 point over President Biden. Each of those differences falls within the margin of error. So note that. Note that the vice president's lead over Trump in a Fox News poll is twice the lead that Trump had over Biden, the current president, after that disastrous performance at the debate. Folks, do you understand what I'm saying? I'm not saying that Trump can't win this election. I'm not saying that the vice president isn't right to be cautious and to fight this political battle as if she were the underdog. That's very, very smart. Take nothing for granted. But when there is good news for the vice president, and indeed there often is, isn't it interesting that Fox is desperate to bury the lead, to just gloss over it? Yeah, if we do reference this Fox poll, talk about, a polling question. A question within the poll, not the top line major poll results. Don't talk about that. Just kind of blitz past that. Talk about the questions and the points in the poll which put pressure on the vice president. Pretty pathetic stuff, and a public indicator of how nervous the Fox propaganda network really is. I should also say that they had another bad poll for Trump recently, because there was a poll post-debate, Fox News poll. Voters think Harris did better than Trump in the debate. Harris tops Biden's performance while Trump's score falls. So that's another devastating poll for Donald Trump on something that matters to him quite a bit, not just the election results, but also the results of the debate, because Trump has been in full copium mode trying to persuade people that actually he dominated that debate. He crushed it, when in fact we all know it was the exact opposite. But all of this makes sense, actually. It's not justifiable. It's not excusable, but it is rational in the sense, because you got to remember the Fox propaganda network is ideologically driven in a way that no news network in mainstream media is. It's just simply not. MSNBC is the closest, left-wing analog to Fox, but, it has nowhere near the success or the reach. So Fox is uniquely ideological and uniquely damaging in its ideology because it's the most successful legacy news network. And when they have shown unflattering polls for Donald Trump in the past, Donald Trump has lost his mind, right? We could bury you in examples of Trump publicly lashing out at Fox, but I just gave you a few. One of the most recent ones, Fox polls are rigged and worthless. And then his campaign sent out a memo. So triggered were they by a recent Fox News poll, which had the vice president down to Kamala Harris, ranting about all the ways that Fox News polls suck, right? And this is Fox. This is Fox, who had to pay an $800 million settlement to Dominion Voting Systems because they are so transparently in the bag for Donald Trump. They defamed a company. They signal boosted knowingly Donald Trump's lies. And by the way, Brett Baier, that straight hard news journalist guy, who isn't in the opinion commentary business, he actually urged Fox executives to reverse a call for a state, I believe it was Arizona, which they had called for President Biden in 2020 correctly. But because it pissed Trump off and they were losing viewer share to Newsmax, Brett Baier suggested that they actually withdraw that call and just wait to try to appease Trump. That was Brett Baier, not Sean Hannity, not Laura Ingraham. That was Brett Baier. That's how poisonous this entire ethos is in Fox News. It affects all of them. Okay. Donald Trump also ranted about Fox News back in June, late June. Again, just one of many examples. The latest Fox News poll is trash. They used a biased Democratic leading sample of voters, polling more Biden 2020 voters than Trump 2020 voters to skew the results in favor of Crooked Joe. I'm leading big in virtually every other poll. So that's why they're hiding this. They know that Donald Trump will be furious if they make a big deal about this poll, the way they absolutely would if it showed an opposite result. If it showed Donald Trump leading the vice president by 2 percentage points, even though it would also be within the margin of error, there would be nonstop chyrons and special reports and special panels dedicated to this. They would have Jessica Tarlov versus 43 Trump-supporting Fox News contributors. It would basically be a holiday at the Fox Propaganda Network. But because it's bad news for Donald Trump, they're trying to bury the lead pretty transparently, pretty pathetically, and they should be called out for it. Speaking of MSNBC wrote a pretty good op-ed about this, that actually the polls, the recent slate of polls, are pretty good for the vice president in aggregate. Kamala Harris has room to grow in the polls. Trump can't stay the same. We don't have time to walk through every national single survey here, but here's a snapshot. Morning Consult has Harris up 6 points nationally in a survey released Tuesday, 1 point higher than the Snap poll it conducted the day after last week's debate. Another poll from Reuters Ipsos that dropped last Friday showed Harris leading Trump 47-42 among registered voters. And the latest New York Times Siena College poll sees a tie nationally among likely voters, with each candidate polling 47% of those surveyed. Things look even better for Harris in the battleground state polls, in which she had been comparatively weaker than in national surveys prior to the debate. The New York Times poll of Pennsylvania has Harris up 4 percentage points over Trump among likely voters, roughly the same as in August. Tuesday had a poll from Suffolk University, USA Today, showing a 3-point lead for Harris in the Keystone State. And almost all of the polls from Marist College and Quinnipiac University of Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin show Harris leading, except for Quinnipiac's Wisconsin poll, which joins a new AARP survey showing a tie. And they go into the details about, again, how the vice president's political potential is greater than Trump's. Trump is basically locked in at about 41 to 43% of Americans in terms of his favorability. The upshot for Trump is he can literally get away with murder. He said that, he could shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and not lose a single vote. There seems to be a lot of basis for this. The downside for him is that he's so unlikable that he has very little opportunity to actually persuade people to join him. Whereas the vice president, her ceiling, she hasn't gotten there yet. She's trending in the right direction, and her ceiling, her potential is greater than his. She's nowhere near as unlikable as he is, and people are more open to liking her than Donald Trump. So again, Donald Trump can win this election. There's no doubt about it. All these polls are, for the most part, within the margin of error. I make no bones about it. But it's so funny how Fox, again, is just bending over backwards to protect Donald Trump's sensitive feelings because they are terrified of what might happen if he catches this Fox News poll, which has him losing by 2 percentage points to the vice president. And then to make matters worse, if they make a big deal about it, they draw attention to it. So again, they're bending over backwards to just kind of slip it under the radar and move on. Pretty pathetic stuff. In the meantime, let me know what you think in the comments.